morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got to talk about that RR to the S to the P, that registered retirement savings plan that so many Canadians think is a scam, especially if you're fighting for early retirement, because this is an account that defers your taxes today. So you made some money, you're in a higher tax bracket, and you say, hey, I don't want to pay tax on this income. Well, the government's going to allow you to shelter that money into an account where you'll defer the taxes to your retirement date when you start drawing against it. But I found some loopholes, some really neat ideas to take advantage of this for somebody looking for early retirement. And damn, if you are already in your 40s and 50s and do not plan on retiring until after 65, then this account is probably a good use case for you anyways. But we're also going to talk about the first-time home buyers, advantages that you get out of this account. Are they worth taking advantage of? We're going to discuss just basically everything that you need to know about this account. So this is something that interests you as a Canadian. Consider hitting that like button, folks, because first and foremost, let's just take a look at my own personal contribution room and how do you find this stuff if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Well, what you can do is if you go onto Google and you literally look up CRA login, it'll allow you to log into the Canadian Revenue Agency account that you have through your financial institution, your bank. And if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage on the left-hand side, we can see RRSP and TFSA. And what we're focusing on here is the deduction limit we get for this registered retirement savings plan, because unlike a TFSA where there's minimums you can contribute every year, the RRSP is purely based off your prior year taxes. Whatever you made, the government allows a percentage of that into the following year that you can use to deduct against your income. And currently I have $11,862 that I could contribute to this account, and I haven't done that yet. I don't have a plans of rushing into that, but let's take a look at my personal account and how I manage it, because many of you know that I got very lucky with this account. I was trading Tesla in this account from 2019, did very well, later diversified it into what I'm going to use for long-term stability, just to make sure that there's, a lot of levelness in this account, a lot less volatility. So I ended up putting that money into Johnson & Johnson, Pepsi stock, the Vanguard S&P 500 index, companies that I'm very comfortable in the next 50 years. If I so just tend to leave it here until my retirement, it could be a cherry on top of my retirement cake. But if you are like me, you might want to retire early. You might not want to wait to draw against this capital. And I have $50,000 in here. So what happens if I pull that money out? Well, we're going to get hit with what are called penalty taxes. Because this is a long-term deferred tax account, the government does not like when you decide to pull that money out early, and they will penalize you for it. In fact, 10% up to the first $5,000, 20% on $5,000 to $15,000, and 30% on anything over $15,000. And again, that is the penalty. That does not include the fact that you still have to pay income tax on this capital after the fact. And if your marginal rate is 20 to 30%, you're going to lose 50% of that 50 grand if I were to pull it out. So I would literally only get to keep literally like half of it if I'm lucky, right? Not as a brag here, but because of Tesla, I'll show you the actual gains I've had in this account and how I might plan on taking advantage of knowing this information, because my account is up 250%. Luckily, so if I pulled all that 50 grand out, I'd literally be left with maybe 20, 25,000 bucks. That is absolutely horrendous, even though there are capital gains attributed to it, right? But what you want to do is, if you're smart, you want to retire early and you want to take advantage of this account, guys, just make a plan where you're not pulling out any more than $5,000 a year. Because let's face it, if you have a year where you don't have a lot of income and you say, hey, I want to pull this money out, I want to use it, just pull out $5,000 a year. I mean, that was my general plan with the TFSA, because I make roughly $500 a month. I literally am going to make about $5,000 to $6,000 in dividends in the tax-free savings account. And I'm like, hey, without touching the initial investment, if I ever need it, hey, there's a backup income of $500 a month. But you could also put the same application toward the RRSP, where you say, hey, I'm not going to draw any more than $5,000 a year. That would allow me to draw $5,000 a year for the next 10 years because I have $50,000 in that account, and I will have only paid 10% withholding plus my marginal income rate, which if that is only around 15 or 20%, because I'm not making more than, say, $40,000 a year in that account, or in general in my income, I'll really only be losing maybe about 30% of that $5,000, which honestly, I know that's terrible, guys, but it's not that bad in consideration, especially if you balance it out with the fact that the TFSA has zero taxes on it. So you pulled $5,000 out from a TFSA, $5,000 out from this account a year. Hey, you're going to probably get left with maybe, $8,000 of it, which probably not that bad. I mean, that's really not that bad, right, guys? So that's one way to look at it, in my opinion, if you wanted to draw against it early. But what else can we use this account for? Well, I always mention this first and foremost, guys. This account is great if you are working at an employment employment job, you have an employment income, and they do contribution matches. If you have an employer that's going to match a certain amount of that income that you make, usually between 3 and 5%, up to like 2,000 or 3,000 usually, but it's variable depending on the job you work for. Do this first. Ask your employer if they have RRSP contributions, because it's an immediate free return. So if they're giving you an immediate free return, you could draw against it and just use the income they gave you on top of what you contributed to pay that tax if you wanted to pull against it early. Now, there are some other things you can do, like the first-time home buyers plan, which, by the way, they're hopefully, if we're lucky, they're going to introduce a brand new tax-free savings account that is just specifically for buying a house. So that way you can draw against that money at a tax reduced or tax-free rate and use it to buy your first home, which I think is way better than this that we currently have with the RRSP, because unfortunately the RRSP only allows you to pull out $35,000 and it's pulled out as a personal loan. You have to pay it back over a given period of time, and if you don't, you get major penalties. And even though it is a tax-free loan, you do not want any kind of a loan going in towards your down payment into a house, because it just increases the amount of money that you're going to have to put away every month to make sure you're paying the bare minimum. So I really do not like the first-time home buyers plan. I'll never use this in my RRSP, but what I may plan on doing is what I mentioned about pulling $5,000 out a year if I so chose to retire early, and if I so chose thought I needed that extra income. But if you don't, this account is wonderful, guys, for just perpetuating tax deferred gains. I mean, the money I've made in here right now, guys, these absurd gains that you see, like this is nuts. Like, this is nuts at how smaller and diminished this would have been if I just kept that money in my personal name and paid taxes on it. Like, there's no way it would be nearly to this extent. But unfortunately, you also have to look at it from the fact that if you're investing in just a personal brokerage account, that capital gains in Canada aren't that taxed in the first place. I think you only pay a tax on 50% of cap gains. So if you invested $1,000, turned it into $2,000, well, you have $1,000 of cap gains after your initial contribution, and that $1,000 will only be taxed on $500 of it at your marginal tax rate, which is way better, in my opinion, than the RRSP's tax rates when you pull it out, because you're taxed on the full amount. They don't care about the cap gains that are made within this account. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but personally, if you're looking for early retirement, that's why I'm not intrigued to be just shoveling money in here, even though I have contribution room. And honestly, because I have a corporation, guys, that corporation allows me to already make tax reduced income that I can invest under the corporation, and that gives me other liability, like less liability from my personal name, a lot more protection from other aspects. So I find if you can take a utility from all of these accounts, your TFSA, your RRSP, if you can get into a corporation, self-employed income, and take advantage of, the investment benefits you get from that end, I think it's going to put you in the best case scenario. And this is coming from somebody that has spent several years building himself up into this kind of level where I have all these different, accounts that give you these tax benefits. And unfortunately, it is finicky. It is one hell of a learning curve. But the reason that we're wanting to take the time to learn this stuff, guys, is because it's going to perpetuate an insane amount of income. Like, if you can figure out how to take advantage of this, save yourself $5,000-10,000 a year in taxes from just utilizing all of these accounts, over 10 years, there's $100,000, 50 or an extra $100,000 in 20 years, that could really turn into $300,000, $500,000 with just some very bare minimum, thought put into it just from understanding a few of the tax regulations in Canada. But at this point, I want to pass the question off to you. Are you guys using your RRSP? If you are, what are your plans with it? Is it purely a retirement account? Are you using it for capital contributions from your work, your or your employment with your boss? And if so, tell me how much your boss is matching your contributions. I mean, this is just a really good Canadian conversation to have, trying to help out my fellow Canadians. So stay cool, stay awesome, and I look forward to catching you